During World War II, the daily meals of soldiers were not just about nourishment. They were a lifeline that could mean the difference between survival and exhaustion. For frontline soldiers, especially in Europe, the standard rations were surprisingly simple but carefully designed to provide enough calories to sustain grueling physical activity. The backbone of the diet was canned meat, such as corned beef or pork, which could be preserved for months without spoiling. These cans were small but packed with protein, giving soldiers the essential energy needed for combat. Alongside the meat, hardtack or dried bread was common, sometimes supplemented with a small portion of dried vegetables or legumes, providing some necessary vitamins and fiber. In some armies, such as the US and British forces, soldiers also received dried fruits or chocolate, treats intended to boost morale and offer quick bursts of energy during long marches or trench duty. The preparation of these rations was minimal. In many situations, soldiers had no access to stoves or cooking facilities, so the food was eaten straight from the can or soaked in water to make it softer. In the field, meals were consumed at irregular times, often dictated by the intensity of battle. Sometimes soldiers would go for a full day without eating, relying solely on field rations, which were designed to last several days. These rations were meticulously planned to provide sufficient calories, protein, and essential nutrients, despite the minimal variety or taste. The food also reflected logistical constraints. For armies moving quickly across front lines, weight and durability were critical. Canned meats, powdered milk, and preserved vegetables could be easily transported by trucks, horses, or supply planes, and they resisted the harsh conditions of mud, rain, and freezing temperatures. For soldiers in the Soviet and Eastern European fronts, access to fresh food was even more limited. Many relied on foraged foods, supplemented by small, irregular shipments of preserved rations. Soldiers developed improvisational skills, boiling water from streams to rehydrate hard biscuits or using small fires to warm tins of meat when possible. Morale was as critical as nutrition. Soldiers often looked forward to small treats, like a piece of chocolate, a spoonful of jam, or a tin of condensed milk, because it reminded them of home. Commanders understood that these small comforts could lift spirits and strengthen the resolve of troops facing unimaginable stress and danger. The scarcity of variety, combined with the repetitive nature of rations, was counterbalanced by the knowledge that every bite helped keep a soldier alive. Field rations were supplemented by mobile kitchens or mess halls whenever possible. During pauses in the front, troops could enjoy simple hot meals, usually a stew or soup made with available meat and vegetables. Yet, even these meals were often modest, serving hundreds or thousands of soldiers at once, highlighting the sheer scale of feeding armies during wartime. Despite the limited ingredients and basic preparation, these daily rations sustained millions of soldiers across multiple continents, forming the backbone of wartime survival. In essence, the daily ration was more than food. It was a testament to organization, logistics, and human endurance. Soldiers learned to appreciate every tin, every piece of bread, and every morsel, understanding that each meal was crucial for strength, morale, and survival. From the mud-filled trenches of Europe to the icy forests of Russia, these simple foods were silent witnesses to bravery, exhaustion, and the relentless demands of global conflict. They remind us that even the smallest details, like a tin of corned beef or a slice of hardtack, played an essential role in the immense machinery of war. Life in the trenches during World War II was grueling, chaotic, and often dangerously unpredictable, and this extended to the soldiers' meals. Unlike the structured environment of base camps, frontline trenches were muddy, cramped, and constantly under threat from enemy fire. Eating here was not a matter of leisure, it was a matter of survival. Soldiers had to consume their rations wherever they could find a moment of relative safety, often crouched behind sandbags, wooden planks, or inside makeshift dugouts. The standard trench diet consisted of canned meat, hardtack, dried vegetables, and occasionally condensed milk or chocolate. In many cases, soldiers would eat directly from the can or package because cooking fires could attract enemy snipers or artillery. Improvisation was essential. For example, soldiers sometimes heated tins of meat by placing them near hot engines, using small stoves when available, or warming them with makeshift braziers. Even water was a precious commodity. Many troops had to boil stream or rainwater to ensure it was safe for drinking. Meal schedules were erratic. Depending on the intensity of battle or the pace of movement, soldiers might eat 3 meals one day and skip the next entirely. In the freezing cold of Eastern Europe or the scorching heat of North Africa, appetite and ration consumption were further influenced by the climate. Soldiers learned to pace their food, stretching limited supplies over days when deliveries were delayed. The mental strain of hunger added to the constant physical exhaustion of trench warfare, making every bite both a relief and a necessity. Rations were carefully designed to provide maximum calories and nutrition in minimal weight. High-protein canned meat, carbohydrate-rich hardtack, and powdered milk ensured soldiers could continue their duties even when activity levels were extreme. Fat content was also critical, particularly for soldiers operating in cold climates, where maintaining body heat could mean the difference between life and death. Field commanders often emphasized the importance of finishing rations as soon as they were received because scavenging or supplementing food in no man's land was extremely dangerous. Sharing and camaraderie played an unexpected role in trench eating. Soldiers would divide tins and biscuits among comrades, sometimes trading items to balance taste, variety, or perceived quality. Small acts, such as passing a piece of chocolate or adding a touch of seasoning to canned meat, boosted morale and strengthened bonds within the unit. In the harsh reality of trench life, these gestures were as vital as bullets or bandages. Despite the simplicity and repetitiveness of trench food, soldiers adapted. Some learned to improve flavor by combining rations with whatever could be foraged, roots, leaves, or wild berries. Others developed techniques for rationing water and heat to make meals more palatable. These small innovations often determined whether a soldier could endure the monotony and stress of prolonged frontline service. Mess kits, utensils, and cooking equipment were scarce. Soldiers often had to eat with improvised tools or even their fingers. Hygiene was a constant challenge. Limited access to clean water made preventing disease difficult. Yet, even in these unsanitary conditions, the consumption of rations remained essential, a lifeline connecting soldiers to the supplies sent from thousands of miles away. In essence, eating in the trenches was a balancing act of survival, ingenuity, and mental endurance. Each ration represented not only physical sustenance but also a connection to home, to safety, and to the larger effort of the war. The trenches were more than battlegrounds. They were kitchens, dining halls, and sometimes the only refuge a soldier had during endless hours of danger. Through mud, cold, and constant threat, soldiers ate, endured, and adapted, demonstrating resilience that went far beyond the battlefield. During World War II, the importance of taste went far beyond mere enjoyment. It was directly tied to the morale and effectiveness of soldiers. Food on the battlefield was often monotonous, consisting mainly of canned meats, hard biscuits, and dehydrated vegetables. These rations were designed for durability and caloric density, not flavor. Yet even in these austere conditions, soldiers found that taste mattered. A warm, flavorful meal could provide a psychological boost, reminding them of home, normalcy, and humanity amid the horrors of war. Commanders understood that morale was as critical as firepower. Troops who were well-fed and satisfied, even minimally, performed better in combat, maintained focus, and endured the harsh conditions of the front lines. Small luxuries in taste, such as a tin of condensed milk, a piece of chocolate or a ration of sugar had an outsized impact. Soldiers eagerly anticipated these treats, and their arrival was often celebrated with quiet moments of camaraderie, sharing bites among comrades to stretch their value. In some cases, soldiers improvised to improve taste. Boiling canned meat with a pinch of foraged herbs, mixing hardtack with powdered milk, or combining rations with bits of fresh vegetables were common practices. These small acts of culinary creativity, though simple, brought comfort and a sense of agency in a situation otherwise dominated by uncertainty and danger. Soldiers learned to adapt, making the best of what was available and finding satisfaction in even the smallest enhancements. Taste also affected energy and physical performance. Sweet and fatty rations, like chocolate or condensed milk, provided quick energy bursts during long marches or combat operations. The psychological reassurance of eating something familiar or enjoyable helped soldiers push through fatigue and physical exhaustion. Mess halls or field kitchens, when accessible, became social hubs where the aroma and warmth of food contributed to a sense of safety and temporary respite from stress. The contrast between bland, monotonous rations and the occasional treat highlighted the human need for flavor. Soldiers who went days without variety often reported feelings of irritation, frustration, or decreased motivation. Even subtle improvements in taste could uplift the spirit, reinforcing a sense of community and shared endurance. Leaders recognized that food was not only sustenance but a strategic tool in maintaining fighting spirit. Across various fronts, armies adapted their rations to local conditions and resources to maximize morale. In the U.S. Army, items like powdered eggs, coffee, and chocolate bars were included to provide comfort. The British Army emphasized tea, biscuits, and small treats. German and Soviet forces often relied on high-calorie staples but supplemented them with morale-boosting items whenever possible. The common thread was understanding that taste could be as powerful as tactics in sustaining an army. Ultimately, taste in wartime was not a luxury. It was a critical element of survival and endurance. A soldier's connection to flavor, to familiar aromas, and to comforting tastes served as a psychological anchor amidst chaos. It reminded them of home, of family, and of the world beyond the trenches. In every bite, soldiers found not only nourishment but courage, resilience, and a small measure of hope. Taste shaped morale, strengthened bonds, and quietly, but powerfully, influenced the outcomes of countless battles during the war. One of the most critical challenges of World War II was ensuring that soldiers at the front had a steady supply of both food and ammunition. The success of an army often depended less on individual heroics and more on the efficiency of its supply lines. For Allied and Axis forces alike, logistical planning became as vital as battlefield strategy. Ammunition, rations, medical supplies, and other essentials had to travel hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles, often through hostile territory and under constant threat from enemy attacks. Food was packaged for both convenience and durability. Canned meats, powdered milk, hard biscuits, and dried vegetables were staples because they could survive the rigors of transport. These supplies were loaded onto trucks, trains, and sometimes even bicycles or horses for the last mile to the front lines. Air supply also played a critical role. Planes dropped rations and ammunition to units that were otherwise cut off, sometimes even delivering small crates via parachute to isolated soldiers deep in enemy territory. In some instances, these airdrop supplies were literally the difference between survival and surrender. Railways were the backbone of wartime logistics. Massive convoys of freight trains transported tons of supplies across Europe, often guarded by troops to prevent sabotage. Bridges, tunnels, and rail yards became strategic targets, and armies invested heavily in repairing or rerouting supply lines whenever they were damaged. On the move, Mobile kitchens accompanied advancing troops to ensure that soldiers could receive hot meals whenever possible. The coordination required was extraordinary. Thousands of tons of food and ammunition had to arrive daily, precisely timed to match the movements of soldiers in combat zones. For front lines in harsh climates like the Eastern Front, the challenge multiplied. Extreme cold, snow, and ice made roads impassable, forcing armies to rely on sleds, animals, or improvised vehicles. Soldiers often waited for days for their supplies, rationing what they had and sometimes surviving on what they could forage from the surrounding land. In these circumstances, the smallest disruption could lead to shortages of food or ammunition, endangering entire units. Ammunition supply was equally critical. Artillery shells, rifle rounds, and grenades were transported in bulk and had to be distributed efficiently to prevent battlefield shortages. Quartermasters and logisticians coordinated with precision, ensuring that each regiment received its exact allotment. Field depots were established just behind the front lines, where supplies were offloaded from trains or trucks and redistributed to units on the move. Soldiers often witnessed enormous stockpiles of both food and weapons, a tangible sign of the scale of modern warfare. Despite the planning, delivery was never without risk. Convoys faced constant attacks from enemy planes, artillery, and partisan forces. Trucks were targeted, rail lines sabotaged, and supply depots bombed. Innovative solutions like nighttime convoys, camouflage nets, and decoy shipments were developed to protect these vital resources. In some cases, a single air or rail strike could disrupt the supply of food and ammunition for days, demonstrating the fragile balance that armies depended upon. The psychological impact of reliable supply chains on soldiers was profound. Knowing that fresh rations and necessary ammunition would reach them boosted morale and confidence. Conversely, delayed or disrupted shipments could create anxiety, reduce combat effectiveness, and increase casualties. Commanders understood that winning the war required more than courage. It demanded the mastery of logistics. In essence, the movement of food and ammunition to the front was a massive, often invisible, operation that sustained armies and enabled them to fight effectively. The coordination, innovation, and sheer effort required to maintain these supply lines underscored a fundamental truth of modern warfare. No army, no matter how brave or well-trained, could survive without a reliable system delivering the essentials of life and combat. Through trucks, trains, planes, and sheer human determination, the lifeblood of armies flowed to the front lines, silently shaping the outcomes of battles and, ultimately, the course of history. In the chaos of World War II, access to clean and safe drinking water was as vital as ammunition or food. Soldiers could survive days without proper rations, but without water, their endurance would rapidly deteriorate. The supply of potable water to the front lines was a constant logistical challenge, often complicated by terrain, climate, and the ongoing threat of enemy action. Commanders knew that maintaining hydration was crucial, not only for physical performance but also for morale and cognitive function. Dehydration could weaken soldiers, making them slower, less alert, and more vulnerable to the dangers of combat. In many theaters of war, water was scarce. On the Eastern Front, for instance, soldiers had to contend with freezing rivers and snow, which had to be melted or boiled to prevent hypothermia and disease. In the deserts of North Africa, soldiers faced extreme heat, making hydration a matter of survival. Field kitchens and supply lines provided water whenever possible, but soldiers often had to rely on natural sources, such as rivers, lakes, or collected rainwater. These sources were rarely clean, and drinking untreated water could lead to dysentery, cholera, or other waterborne illnesses, compounding the hardships of combat. Logistics officers developed innovative methods to transport water over long distances. Large water tanks were mounted on trucks, trains, or even sleds in winter campaigns. In some cases, water was purified with chemicals or filtered through rudimentary field devices to make it safe for consumption. Paratrooper and isolated units often received airdropped water containers, sometimes along with their rations, ensuring they remained operational in areas cut off from traditional supply routes. Even small errors in distribution could have severe consequences, causing dehydration, illness, or reduced combat readiness. The daily ration of water for a soldier varied by climate and activity, but generally ranged from 3 to 5 liters per day, sometimes more during heat waves or heavy exertion. Hot beverages like tea or coffee were highly valued not only for their flavor but also for morale. Troops often eagerly awaited the arrival of tea rations or instant coffee, which provided warmth in freezing trenches and a sense of comfort reminiscent of home. Sugar, when available, was added to these drinks, giving soldiers a quick energy boost. Soldiers developed creative ways to manage water scarcity. Melting snow or ice, boiling contaminated water, or digging small wells became routine practices. In tropical or jungle campaigns, rainwater was often collected in makeshift containers, while rivers were carefully filtered and treated. Commanders emphasized strict rationing during campaigns with limited supplies, knowing that water discipline could be as decisive as military strategy in sustaining an army. The importance of water went beyond hydration. It was intimately linked to sanitation and disease prevention. Washing hands, cleaning utensils, and maintaining camp hygiene depended on access to water. Inadequate water supplies often led to outbreaks of dysentery and other illnesses, which could incapacitate entire units more effectively than enemy fire. Medical officers constantly stressed that water management was as critical as any weapon on the battlefield. In essence, water and drinks during wartime were not merely refreshment. They were a lifeline, a strategic resource, and a daily concern that affected every soldier. From freezing rivers in Eastern Europe to the scorching deserts of Africa, from improvised wells in jungles to chemical-purified tanks at the front, water shaped the daily routines, health, and morale of soldiers across all fronts. Understanding how armies managed this essential resource offers a window into the immense complexity of war, showing that victory depended not only on bravery and strategy, but also on the careful, relentless management of life-sustaining essentials. One of the most grueling aspects of World War II for soldiers was the long marches, often stretching for dozens of kilometers, undertaken with minimal food. Mobility was essential in both offensive and defensive operations, and soldiers were frequently required to march day after day, sometimes carrying heavy packs of equipment, ammunition, and personal belongings. The combination of physical exertion, exposure to harsh weather, and the scarcity of rations tested endurance, willpower, and ingenuity. A typical soldier could carry anywhere from 20 to 40 kilograms of gear, which included rifles, ammunition, winter or summer clothing, and sometimes small personal items. The sheer weight, combined with extended marches over muddy roads, rugged terrain, or snow-covered landscapes, meant that energy expenditure was extremely high. Despite this, food supplies were often limited. Soldiers sometimes had only a single meal per day or had to rely on emergency rations, small portions of hardtack, dried meat, or canned goods meant to last multiple days. Dehydration and hunger became constant challenges. Troops marching through deserts or plains sometimes had to ration their water carefully, supplementing with any available streams, rivers, or rainfall. In Eastern Europe and Russia, melting snow or ice was a necessity, but consuming untreated water carried the risk of disease. Commanders understood that starvation and dehydration could reduce combat effectiveness as much as enemy fire, and planning resupply along the route was a vital logistical concern. The mental strain of marching for hours with an empty stomach was immense. Soldiers reported feelings of fatigue, irritability, and weakness, which affected not only morale but also unit cohesion. In such conditions, camaraderie was essential. Comrades shared rations, encouraged one another, and sometimes traded small luxuries, like a piece of chocolate or a sip of coffee, to maintain morale. These small acts were lifelines in a harsh and relentless environment. Occasionally, troops foraged or scavenged to supplement their food supply. In occupied territories, soldiers collected fruits, roots, or whatever edible plants they could find. However, these efforts were unpredictable and sometimes dangerous, as foraging could expose troops to enemy patrols or contaminated food. Military planners often distributed emergency iron rations, concentrated and high-calorie packets designed to sustain soldiers for 1 to 3 days when supply lines were delayed or inaccessible. Fatigue from long marches without adequate food had physical consequences. Muscle cramps, exhaustion, and reduced alertness were common. Hypothermia in winter conditions or heat stroke in summer campaigns was exacerbated by insufficient nutrition and hydration. Medics constantly reminded soldiers to pace themselves, share water, and preserve energy whenever possible. But in the heat of movement, these measures were often insufficient. Despite the extreme hardship, soldiers adapted. Experienced troops learned how to pace their marches, distribute weight efficiently, and consume small portions strategically to maintain strength. Leadership emphasized discipline, ensuring that units moved in coordinated formations, taking brief rest periods to eat and hydrate when possible. Every mile completed without sustenance was a testament to endurance, teamwork, and sheer determination. In essence, the long marches without food highlight the incredible physical and psychological demands placed on soldiers during World War II. Survival depended not only on rationing and planning, but also on ingenuity, resilience, and mutual support. Each step forward under exhaustion and hunger demonstrated the human capacity to endure extreme conditions. The success of armies often hinged on these marches, silent, grueling, and relentless journeys where the most basic needs, food and water, became precious commodities shaping the fate of soldiers and the outcome of battles alike. Winter on the battlefields of World War II presented a relentless enemy just as dangerous as opposing soldiers: the cold. Soldiers stationed on the Eastern Front, in particular, faced temperatures that could plunge to -40 degrees Celsius, where frostbite, hypothermia, and exposure were constant threats. Survival in such conditions required preparation, ingenuity, and sometimes sheer luck. Commanders and logisticians recognized that proper clothing and shelter were essential to keep soldiers combat-ready, as a frozen body was useless, no matter how well-trained or well-armed. The standard winter kit varied between armies, but essentials included layered woolen clothing, heavy coats, insulated boots, gloves, and hats. Soldiers often wore multiple layers, sometimes under standard uniforms, to trap body heat. Improvised additions, such as stuffing jackets with straw or rags, were common when issued clothing was insufficient. Socks and gloves were rotated, dried over fires when possible, or even exchanged among comrades to maintain warmth. Footwear was especially crucial. Frozen feet could incapacitate a soldier faster than any enemy bullet. Shelter in winter conditions was often rudimentary. Trenches became ice-filled, wind-swept prisons, while dugouts were crowded and poorly insulated. Soldiers built makeshift stoves from metal scraps, dug small fire pits, or huddled together to conserve heat. Snow served as both enemy and ally. It blocked wind in some cases but also caused trenches to flood when it melted. Maintaining dry conditions was a constant struggle. Damp clothing could freeze overnight, turning even brief exposure into a life-threatening situation. Food and drink played an equally critical role in survival. Cold weather increased caloric needs dramatically. Soldiers required energy-dense rations to maintain body heat. Warm meals were rare but invaluable. In some cases, even a simple hot drink, like tea or coffee, provided not only nourishment but also psychological relief, helping soldiers endure hours of freezing vigilance. Water management was also more difficult. Rivers froze, snow and ice had to be melted, and contamination was always a concern. The impact of cold extended to weapons and equipment. Rifles could jam, artillery crews struggled with frozen mechanisms, and vehicles often failed to start. Soldiers had to adapt continuously, learning how to protect both themselves and their tools from the freezing environment. Frostbite injuries were common, sometimes resulting in permanent damage or amputation. Survival depended on constant awareness of the body's limits and proactive measures to prevent injury. Camaraderie became a matter of life and death. Soldiers shared body heat, exchanged clothing, and assisted one another in melting snow or maintaining fires. Small gestures, helping a comrade adjust layers, sharing a blanket, or lending a boot, were crucial in a world where the cold could kill faster than the battlefield. The mental fortitude required to endure long, dark winters, often under bombardment and threat, was immense. Commanders emphasized the importance of rest, nutrition, and teamwork to prevent both physical and psychological collapse. In essence, surviving the cold in World War II demanded more than courage. It required resilience, ingenuity, and cooperation. Every layer of clothing, every shared fire, and every warm morsel of food represented a deliberate effort to keep soldiers alive and effective in combat. The brutal winters of Europe and Asia became both an obstacle and a battlefield of their own, shaping strategy, testing endurance, and ultimately proving that the cold was an adversary that could not be ignored. During World War II, survival packages became an essential lifeline for soldiers operating in remote or isolated areas. These packages, meticulously designed by military logisticians, were intended to provide everything a soldier might need for several days when cut off from the main supply lines. The contents balanced nutrition, energy, and practicality, reflecting years of experience and trial on the front lines. Without these packages, soldiers facing long marches, harsh climates, or intense combat could find themselves in life-threatening situations. A typical survival package included high-calorie rations, such as canned meats, biscuits, dried fruits, and chocolate. These items were chosen for their long shelf life and ability to sustain energy in demanding conditions. Soldiers were often issued condensed milk or powdered milk, which could be mixed with water to provide essential nutrients. Fat, protein, and carbohydrates were carefully calculated to ensure soldiers could endure both extreme physical exertion and prolonged periods without additional food. The packages were compact yet dense, reflecting the necessity of portability while maintaining maximum sustenance. In addition to food, survival packages sometimes contained essential tools. Simple utensils, waterproof matches, and small cooking implements allowed soldiers to prepare meals and boil water. Some packages included basic medical supplies, such as bandages or antiseptics, which could prove invaluable when access to field hospitals was limited. In extreme environments like the deserts of North Africa or the frozen Eastern Front, these tools and provisions were often the difference between life and death. The distribution of survival packages required careful planning. They were airdropped to isolated units, carried in backpacks during long marches, or delivered via supply convoys. In some cases, special operations teams received custom packages tailored to the mission and environment. For paratroopers and reconnaissance units, these packages were deliberately lightweight and compact, allowing soldiers to carry them during infiltration and extraction missions. Commanders understood that timely delivery and proper contents were critical to maintain combat effectiveness in remote or hostile conditions. Soldiers quickly learned to value the contents of these packages, often rationing them carefully to extend their effectiveness. Canned meat could be eaten immediately, while hardtack or biscuits were saved for later, ensuring a steady source of energy. Even small luxuries like chocolate or instant coffee were treasured, not merely for taste, but for the psychological comfort they provided. Sharing these items with comrades reinforced camaraderie, created small moments of relief, and strengthened unit cohesion under extreme stress. Improvisation was also key. Soldiers sometimes combined rations with foraged items, melted snow for water, or repurposed packaging materials for shelter or insulation. These practices demonstrated ingenuity and resourcefulness, traits that often determine survival in harsh and unpredictable environments. Survival packages, therefore, were not only sustenance, they were tools of adaptation, enabling soldiers to continue operations despite environmental and logistical obstacles. Ultimately, survival packages exemplified the intersection of planning, technology, and human endurance in wartime. They were small but vital elements of military strategy, ensuring that even when isolated or under pressure, soldiers could remain functional, nourished, and resilient. Each tin, biscuit, and item of equipment carried within these packages represented a carefully considered solution to the daily challenges of combat. They were silent, portable lifelines, bridging the gap between supply lines and the harsh realities of the battlefield, and proving that survival in war often depended as much on preparation as on courage. Even in the midst of the harshest conditions during World War II, armies recognized the profound impact that small luxuries or special treats could have on soldiers' morale. While daily rations were designed for sustenance and durability, these treats were intended to lift spirits, provide comfort, and remind soldiers of home. Simple items such as chocolate, dried fruit, sugar, jam, or small biscuits were eagerly anticipated, often cherished far more than their caloric value. These treats served as both a psychological boost and a tangible reward after exhausting marches or intense combat operations. In many armies, the distribution of treats was carefully coordinated. The U.S. military, for example, included chocolate bars in field rations, sometimes fortified with additional calories and vitamins. Soldiers often saved these bars for moments of extreme fatigue or shared them among comrades, creating bonds of camaraderie. Similarly, the British Army valued tea and sweet biscuits as morale boosters, recognizing that a warm drink or a touch of sweetness could temporarily relieve stress and fatigue. German and Soviet forces incorporated small treats into field rations whenever possible, understanding that food was not only fuel but a tool for maintaining mental resilience. The significance of these treats went beyond simple pleasure. Soldiers reported that even a small piece of chocolate or a spoonful of jam could improve mood, reduce anxiety, and provide a sense of normalcy amidst chaos. In the freezing trenches of Eastern Europe or the scorching deserts of Africa, these morsels were a reminder that life beyond the battlefield existed. Commanders understood that morale could influence combat effectiveness, and providing small luxuries became a strategic consideration. Improvisation played a role in maximizing the benefits of treats. Soldiers combined rations with small additions from the local environment, such as wild berries or herbs, to improve taste and variety. During long marches or periods of isolation, sharing these items became a form of silent communication, acts of care and solidarity that reinforced unit cohesion. Treats were often rationed carefully, consumed slowly to extend their psychological effect, and sometimes hidden to ensure they would last through the harshest periods. Special treats also carried symbolic meaning. They were often distributed on holidays, birthdays, or significant military anniversaries, offering soldiers a brief but poignant connection to the world beyond war. Receiving chocolate, candy, or other delicacies served as a reminder of family, home, and the lives soldiers had temporarily left behind. In many cases, these small comforts helped maintain hope, courage, and endurance in the face of exhaustion, danger, and uncertainty. The logistical effort to provide these treats was not insignificant. Supply chains had to account for their fragile nature, limited shelf life, and weight considerations. Airdrops, mobile kitchens, and supply convoys ensured that these morale boosters reached the front lines, even in isolated or contested areas. The meticulous planning underscored the military understanding that human factors, psychology, morale, and emotional resilience, were just as critical to victory as weapons and strategy. In essence, special treats in wartime illustrate how even the smallest comforts can have a disproportionate impact on survival and performance. They were more than sugar or chocolate. They were symbols of care, morale, and humanity. Soldiers treasured them, shared them, and relied on them to sustain not just their bodies but their spirits. These seemingly minor items quietly influenced the outcomes of battles, reinforcing the idea that in war, attention to human needs, however small, can be as vital as firepower. Wartime logistics in World War II was a monumental challenge, often determining the success or failure of entire campaigns. Supplying millions of soldiers with food, water, ammunition, medical supplies, and fuel required immense planning, coordination, and resilience. The complexity of modern warfare meant that armies could move quickly, but only if their supply chains kept pace. Every bridge, rail line, truck convoy, and supply depot was a critical link in a network that spanned continents. Failure at any point could jeopardize entire operations. Transporting supplies was fraught with danger. Convoys of trucks or trains were vulnerable to air attacks, artillery fire, and sabotage by enemy forces. Roads and railways could be destroyed, snowed in, or flooded, forcing logisticians to find alternative routes. In Eastern Europe, harsh winters froze rivers and destroyed bridges, while in North Africa, sandstorms and extreme heat caused mechanical failures. Every delivery of food, water, or ammunition required not just planning but adaptation to constantly changing conditions. The challenge of feeding soldiers was particularly significant. Millions of troops required daily rations, which included high-calorie canned meats, biscuits, chocolate, and powdered milk. The rations had to be durable, lightweight, and able to withstand long journeys under harsh conditions. Field kitchens were sometimes available, but in many cases, soldiers consumed the food directly from tins or packages. Ensuring timely delivery, maintaining quality, and distributing supplies across dispersed and mobile units tested the limits of logistics. Ammunition supply was equally critical. Artillery shells, small arms rounds, and explosives had to reach frontline units reliably. Any disruption could halt an offensive or leave soldiers vulnerable. Ammunition depots were established behind the front lines, from which supplies were dispatched in carefully coordinated convoys. Special operations, paratroopers, and reconnaissance units required tailored packages of both food and ammunition, which demanded precision in planning and execution. Medical and personal supplies added another layer of complexity. Bandages, antiseptics, medications, and even clothing had to reach soldiers across miles of rugged terrain. In extreme climates, these supplies were essential for survival. Water had to be transported and purified. In freezing or desert conditions, hydration could be as critical as combat readiness. Logistics officers coordinated closely with frontline commanders to ensure that the timing, quantity, and quality of supplies met the constantly shifting demands of battle. Air supply became a revolutionary solution for isolated units or rapidly advancing fronts. Planes dropped crates of food, water, and ammunition, sometimes parachuted directly to soldiers in cut-off positions. These airdrops required precision and timing, as mistakes could result in lost supplies or enemy capture. Ground teams often had to retrieve and distribute the drops under challenging conditions, making coordination and communication vital. The human element was central to logistics. Drivers, Pilots, rail workers, and quartermasters labored under extreme conditions, often risking their lives to maintain the flow of supplies. Soldiers' survival depended not only on battlefield bravery but on the tireless, often invisible work of these men and women. Every tin of food, every bullet, and every liter of water was the result of careful planning, relentless effort, and adaptability. Ultimately, the challenges of wartime logistics demonstrate that modern warfare extends far beyond combat. Victory depended not only on strategy and courage but on the ability to feed, equip, and sustain millions of individuals across vast, hostile territories. The success of supply chains shaped battles, campaigns, and even the outcome of the war itself. Logistics was the lifeblood of armies, silently determining the endurance, morale, and effectiveness of soldiers in every theater of conflict. Without it, no matter the bravery of the troops, victory would have been impossible.